was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of with a man who said he was a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up as a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with some patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Church, we believe Jesus is who he said he was. He is the bread to feed upon, the light to follow, the door to enter, the shepherd to guide, the resurrection upon which to wait, the way of salvation to trust, and the vine in which to abide. Now, every single one of those things is declaring the same thing about Jesus, and it's simply just a different metaphor. He came as was to be. He came as he was to be. And he came as he did to do what he did. It comes in John chapter 8, and there's this argument going on about Jesus and who he is, and they're having this conversation about their father of the faith. They're talking about Abraham, the father of all of Israel. And Jesus declares that, you know what, I know him. I know Abraham. And what the Jewish people say to him, they say, listen, you're not even 50 years old yet. How could you know Abraham? And he responds to them by saying, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was born, I am. Throughout the Gospel of John, there are 7 other I am statements. And I got real clever, and I entitled my new sermon series, I am. And so over the next month, we're going to look at these statements, and really they're more than just statements, they're conversations that Jesus is having with many times his enemies. And I believe it's an awesome word for us this month. And one of the things I love so much about these I am statements is that they're brief. They're not long, drawn-out statements. They're exact statements. They're beautiful statements. But they're also, even though there's brevity and there's beauty, there is a boldness to every one of them. Every time Jesus declares, I am, he's basically saying, I am God. He's declaring that he is the Messiah. He's not talking about claiming to know about these things or even saying that he's capable of explaining these things. He's blatantly saying that he is these things. And church, if this is true, if Jesus truly is, I am, and all the things that we'll talk about this month, the implications and the impact are tremendous. Reaching deep into our real and daily lives. They're life-changing transformations with everlasting consequences. So we pick up our first I am statement, which is actually the second time he said it, and we're going to backtrack next week and go to the first one he says. But join with me in John chapter 8, starting in verse 12, and we'll be traveling through to verse 20. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The Pharisees challenged him. Here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus answered, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid. For I know where I came from and where I'm going, but you have no idea where I came from or where I'm going. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. But if I do judge, my decisions are right, because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it is written that the testimony of two men is valid. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me. Verse 19, then they asked him, where is your Father? You do not know me or my Father, Jesus replied. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while teaching in the temple area near the place where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him because his time had not yet come. Jesus declares, I am the light of the world. Now, these words to the Israelites, to the Jewish people in the temple that day, would have been very, very familiar. And they would have been of the highest degree of blasphemy. There is only one who can declare, I am. And that is God. And so their hostility for Jesus, really 6 months before he's going to die, is at the height. They want to kill him on this day. And it would not happen for another 6 months from the point of this story. But basically what Jesus is saying is he's claiming that he is the Messiah, that he is capable and is doing the work only God could do. Because we know that in the Old Testament, light only refers to God. There's no other use of light in the Old Testament but for God. We see in Exodus 3:14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Psalm 27:1 says, the Lord is my light. Isaiah 60:19, the Lord will be your everlasting light. By his light I walk through darkness. Job 29:3. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. Micah 7:8. I wonder if all of those things came to mind. But I bet there was probably one passage of Scripture that most came to their mind when they heard these words, I am the light of the world. It would have been taking them all the way back to when they were wandering, not them, but their ancestors, wandering in the wilderness between the captivity of Egypt and the promised land of Canaan. They're lost in this wilderness for 40 years, and there was a presence of God that remained with them the entire time. And it's found in Exodus 13:21 and 22. It says this, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. This is what they thought of when they were standing in that temple that day, and they hear this joker named Jesus talking about being the light of the world. They hearken back to the idea that there was a light that led them every day of their journey between captivity and the promised land. This pillar of smoke, which would have simply just been fire, and the smoke from the fire was what they followed in the daytime, and then certainly the flame and the blaze at night is what they followed in the evening. But I think it's more than this, and if you can track with me just a little longer, I think so much of what Jesus is stating here is so steeped in the Old Testament that we have to return back to the truths of the Old Testament, turn back to the context, the scene of the event, really to understand the meaning. If we're going to say, what did Jesus really mean when he said, I am the light of the world? Like, I wanted it to be something profound, and I wanted it to be this great, and I just kind of raced back and forth through the New Testament, pulling out all these passages. But the truth of the matter is, everything Jesus meant in what he said was dictated by where he was at. And follow me for a minute. What we need to know about not only what Jesus said, but where he said it because it's so important to the meaning. Look with me in verse 20 of John chapter 8. And it's at the end of the passage, and it really seems insignificant because Jesus is done talking. But John gives us a little description of where he's at. He spoke these words while teaching in the temple area where near the place where the offerings were put. So let me set the scene for you. It's the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, that seems insignificant to us because none of us know what the Feast of Tabernacles is, but let me tell you what it is. The Feast of Tabernacles is commemorating that time when they were wandering. It's commemorating the time between the captivity in Egypt and the promised land in Canaan and how God was with them. And this Feast of Tabernacles was a 7-day event, and parties were held, ceremonies were held, worship services were held in the courtyard of the temple. And not just any courtyard. See, one of the things we know is that there were several courtyards in the temple. The first courtyard was for the Gentiles. And this is the Gentile courtyard because this is as far as the Gentiles could go. And beyond the Gentile courtyard was the courtyard of the women. Now, anybody was allowed to go there, but the reason why it was called the courtyard of the women is because that is as far as the women were able to go. And the next courtyard was the courtyard of the priests. And this is where all the sacrifices were made. Now, women were allowed into the courtyard of the priests if they were making a sacrifice. So you have the Gentiles, you have the courtyard of the women, and then you have the courtyard of the priests, and then you have the Holy of Holies, which is only the high priest once a year goes in there and makes a sacrifice. So it's the Feast of Tabernacles. They're in the courtyard of the women. And the thing that happens in the courtyard of the women is that is where the offering is brought. There are 13 against the wall on one porch. There are 13 basically treasure chests. And this is where the people came to bring their offering. Now, something else is happening in there. One of the rituals that happens during the Feast of Tabernacles is the feast or the ritual of illumination of the temple. The illumination of the temple is this. There are 4 giant candelabras. They're giant. And on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, they light these candelabras. And it's told in history that when these are lit, the blaze is so large in this courtyard that every courtyard in Jerusalem can see this light and is lit up by the illumination of the temple. So this is the setting. Feast of Tabernacles, in the courtyard of the women. People are coming and going because they have to bring their offerings. And it's the morning after the illumination of the temple. So all that is left are these extinguished candelabras. And all of the spectators areas that were built for this party that happened all last night. All last night, the holiest, wisest, brightest people in all of Jerusalem were there, and they were partying all night because the illumination of the temple was happening. In the Feast of Tabernacles, they're celebrating that God's presence had been with them. They're celebrating the light that led them all those years. It's the next morning. Jesus walks in to the courtyard of the women. He sees the extinguished candelabras. The festival's over. And the only thing that's remaining are these massive candelabras. He says, you remember last night? You remember the blaze? You remember the stories of in the wilderness and how God led the people? You remember the brightness throughout the entire city? And I would imagine with some humble but definitive gesture, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows will have the light of light. We're not just talking about the wilderness. We're not just talking about one city. We're talking about the entire world. We're not just talking about when you're having a bad day. We're not just talking about when you're at 1340 Washington Pike. No, I'm the light of the world. It's not just about one exciting night, but it's for all time in all pathways. A light that will never flicker or die, but last forever. Church, Jesus Christ is not the light for today. He's not the light for, thank God you got me out of that. He's not the light for, I hope my kid gets into college. He is the light of the world. He is the light for every day in all pathways. And I love the definite article here. He's not talking about I am a light. Jesus gets extremely narrow. People always criticize Christianity for being too narrow. Like, man, you're just too narrow. Why is it so narrow? Why can't you just make more pathways? Why can't it just be larger and wider? I mean, why does it have to be so narrow? That's the point. Jesus is the only way. So it's admittedly narrow. He is not a light. He is the light. Church, we can't go any further in this message without talking about darkness. There's no need for light if it's already present. And so Jesus is certainly admitting that there is a certain amount of darkness, and a darkness that is powerful. John chapter 3, 19 and 20 says this. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. Every one of us understands that scripture. I don't need to read it again. Everyone knows that you keep things that you don't want people to know about in the dark. And they realize that when it comes out into the light, people find out about it. It gets exposed, and people love darkness. But here's the problem. People actually don't love darkness. See, we love darkness because it's so familiar to us, and we feel safe. But in actuality, if we're honest, we hate the darkness, and we feel most scared when we're alone and holding in all the things that we have hidden. So it's this paradox. That which we hate, we hold on to so tightly. And that which can help us is that which we run away from. It's not a darkness as in like, well, I'm not going to tell you what it is, and I'll tell you what it is. It's a darkness of the soul. It's not a darkness of like, oh, you know, it's dark places. The darkness is within us. So here's the thing. Church has been around for 2,000 years. Let's think about this for a second. 2,000 years, the light has been available. But how do we get people to come into that light? Because we admit that light exposes. The truth about what and who we are comes out in the light. Here's what I want to tell you this morning. If you haven't listened to one thing that I've said, I want you to hear this. It is very true that we conceal, and darkness conceals that which we don't want exposed. But I think the truth is this, that as you are trying to conceal that which you hope never gets exposed, you actually are also concealing what's most beautiful about you. You're most concealing that which is great about you. And so there's this battle in the darkness. There's these wonderful gifts and talents and abilities and passions and desires that are in the darkness with our sin and our shame and our guilt. And so we just remain in this darkness. And yes, our sin does not get exposed, but also our excellence and our beauty and our giftedness remains in the dark. See, the impact light has on and in darkness is very profound. The darkness of falsehood, he is the light of truth. In the darkness of ignorance, he is the light of wisdom. In the darkness of impurity, he is the light of holiness. In the darkness of sorrow, he is the light of joy. In the darkness of death, he is the light of life. He is everything the world isn't. He is the Messiah in the mess. Joyce Meyer. I don't think I've ever quoted her, but I'm going to right now. How many people know Joyce Meyer, right? She's a pretty good preacher, right? So one day I was watching some, flipping through the channels, and she said something that's very profound, and I'm arguing with God about it right now. So I'm in process. Okay, so this is half-baked. I'm just going to tell you that right up front. Joyce Meyer said, and if this is true, oh, dear Jesus. Joyce Meyer said, God will make your mess your message. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Think about that for a second. The very thing that we hide in the darkness, the very thing that we hope nobody ever finds out about us, is actually the message that God wants to use you to share. The young lady who had an abortion goes and shares her story. The man who's been unfaithful to his wife makes that his ministry. I am the light of the world. I am the one who can make your mess your message. So, the second half of this message is really the conversation that Jesus has with the Pharisees about the statement he just made. And so what they initially do when they hear this statement about he's the light of the world and he's the Messiah and he's God, and they're thinking, you know what? False. That's not true. You only have one witness, and our law says you must have two. If you don't have two witnesses, your testimony, your witness is invalid. And one of the things I thought about this, and I didn't really research it that much because I just didn't, but I wonder the reason why one word, one person's testimony wasn't good enough. One person's witness wasn't good enough. And here's what I've come up with. The reason why they didn't trust you to speak is because they didn't trust themselves. I have found that when I have problems with somebody, a lot of times if I investigate, I have insecurities in my own life. And so I don't trust you because I really don't trust me. And maybe that's what's going on here. The reason why they couldn't trust the one voice, the one testimony, the one witness is because they didn't trust themselves. And guess what? There's never going to be enough evidence to overcome unbelief. And so if you're living with a spouse, or you have a friend or a coworker, you can talk about Jesus until you're blue in the face, because there's never enough evidence to overcome unbelief. And you guys are thinking, what? Are you preaching heresy? But think about this in your own life. It wasn't that person was so persuasive. There was something on the inside that changed about you, wasn't there? There was a nudge, and there was a pull, and there was something that happened within you. And yes, maybe God used these people to share with you and to love you and carry you along, but unbelief doesn't change without God's moving in your life. God has to awaken the soul ever before anything someone says to you is going to be effective in your heart. It has to come from the inside out. God has given us ears and eyes and nose and mouth, but he's given us a heart, and he has to activate the heart ever before people respond to the truth. There must be a longing and a desire and a nudge and an opening. I mean, that's what Josh said in his prayer this morning. He's saying, listen, open up your hearts. Because it's very easy. We've gotten very good at shutting down and closing out. And so the light of the world shows up. The light of the world is available today. But if we are not open, if we are not available, if we do not long for or desire, we will not respond. And it won't be trusted. You know, one of the things that I was reminded of as I saw this conversation between the Pharisees and Jesus was this idea of verbalized ignorance. This idea that people deny things and reject things that they know nothing about. They're just talking. You know, you ever heard anyone say to you, you know what, I don't believe all that stuff about Jesus. I'm not really into that Jesus stuff. Here's what you need to say back to them. Exactly what of the Jesus stuff don't you believe? That stuff. They're rejecting it. They don't even know it. They don't even know what they're rejecting. They are not sure about what it is. It's verbalized ignorance. We simply deny things that are unclear to us. We reject things that are not clear to us. And that's basically what the Pharisees are doing here. They're having this conversation with Jesus, and they're saying, you couldn't possibly be the light of the world because we don't even know what and who you are. I want to try to bring us in for a landing here. Jesus goes on in verses 16, 17, and 18, and again, he explains why he should be trusted. He talks about the intimacy with the Father. He talks about he and the Father being one, and he's giving examples after examples of why he can be trusted and his witness can be obeyed. And they finally, in verse 19, ask, where is this Father that you talk about? And you realize that Jesus is very clear. He says, listen, you cannot know the Father if you don't know me. Again, a very, very narrow statement. Outside of Christendom, that would be really a bad statement to say. We are saying you cannot truly know God unless you know Jesus. That is what Jesus is saying. And there are a lot of people in this world that would disagree with that. That they could have a relationship with God and let go of Jesus and care less about Jesus. When we're saying, listen, you cannot know God unless you know the light of the world. Church, the Israelites had a pillar. And it was a pillar of smoke during the day, and it was a pillar of fire at night. But we have such an unbelievably more close pillar of fire within us. The scriptures tell us that light is not outward. That light, the light of the world, is inward. It is the power of the Holy Spirit that has been given to us as believers. If we believe, if we have come into a relationship with Jesus Christ, if we have received the I am the light of the world, if you receive Jesus Christ, he is not on the outward. He is not someone we need to look towards or out to see. He is within us. He resides within us. And so everything that the people of Israel believed about God, that he was the identifier. We are identified by God. He is the purifier. He is our protector. He is our guide. All of that resides within us when we receive the light of the world. But here's how we end this message. Your proximity and posture matter in relation to the light. Your proximity and posture matter in relation to the light. I am not a scientist, but I know shadows, right? So if I'm facing the light, the shadow is behind me. If the light is behind me, the shadow is in front of me. Now, not here because we have lights every direction, but do you understand that? Like, light travels in a straight line until it is reflected or blocked or scattered. I mean, think about it in the sun. The higher the sun is, the less there is a shadow. And in the evening, right? Doesn't the shadow get really long in the evening? And there's more distortion? I think there is a spiritual application there. The higher the sun, the higher the light of the world is in our life, the less we'll have shadows. But the lower he is, the least significant he is, the longer the shadow is, the more distortion there is in our life. And listen, call it corny, but it's true. Think about it. Think about it in your own life. Your proximity to God, your proximity to the light, probably has a lot to do with the shadows in your life. I'm going to ask the worship team to come back. So each summer, for the last several summers, we've gone to the beach. And the beach we go to is kind of a funky beach, and I'm going to tell you why. So I'm thinking, oh, isn't it cool? You go to the beach, right? You should see the sunrise, right? Here's the problem with the beach that we go to. The beach that we go to doesn't face east, right? It faces south. So when you get up and like, oh, look, we're going to go and we're going to see the sunrise. And we get up and I'm looking out at the ocean, at the horizon, and there's no sun rising. And I look off to my left, which is east, and the sun's coming up over the buildings. I'm thinking, this is silly. I wasted all morning, and eventually the sun comes up. But that's just it's a clear demonstration to me that the way that we're looking, the way that we are postured, the way that we are positioned matters in the light. Church, whether or not we respond, whether or not we're positioned, whether or not we believe in the light, the scriptures are clear. He says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness. I don't know what the darkness is. I know my darkness. I don't know your darkness. But this entire month, we are going to look at who Jesus is. We have unashamedly said that Jesus is what we are about at this church. Every Sunday, Jesus Christ. And so this week and this month, I've decided to simply talk about what Jesus talked about. If Jesus thinks he's something, I want to tell you what he says. And over the next month, we're going to talk about the I am statements. This week, we talked about I am, the light of the world. Next week, we're going to talk about I am the bread of life. And I believe that each one of these has an application and implication in our life. And so as we go through this Christmas season, as we go through this holy season, I pray that you would interact with the I am. Interact with who Jesus said he was.